Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we've got Simon on and he's a full stack developer. Hi Simon.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Yes, good, thank you. Very good.
Let's jump straight in then, Simon. So do you want to tell everyone a bit about what you actually do?
Yeah, so basically, I am a full stack web developer, which means that I work on web applications specifically. So, I mean, at this point, that is basically any website with a good amount of functionality. So, a web app would be Facebook, Airbnb's website, those kinds of things where it's sort of really feature rich, and maybe you're logging in and you're kind of really doing something there more than just say browsing or what have you. And being full stack means that I work the whole way through what we refer to as the tech stack. So I won't go too tech, but there are three layers to most web applications, which is the front end, which is the bit that you kind of think about when you think of a website. That's the bit with the buttons and the forms and what have you, the user interface. Then there's the server, which I think most people have heard of servers, and that's where a lot of the kind of back end processing is, algorithms and that kind of thing that we hear a lot about these days with Instagram and Facebook. And then the database and the infrastructure. So really, end to end, I do the full stack, and each of those layers can be their own role. But when you're full stack, you work at every single level. So you need to know quite a bit about what's going on in the system.
I have been so excited to get on and start talking to you because I've only just discovered this world of coding, of development.
Okay,
And it's kind of blown my mind. We had a couple of guys on who specialize in this kind of area, but within legal, so they're legal tech. And that kind of like piqued my interest. But I will probably absolutely crucify some terminology and not know what I'm talking about. But it's so interesting because we were actually talking, me and Jules, before we come on the podcast, how we kind of think that coding, in 100 years' time, you'll look back and if you can't code, it's almost like we look at people who can't read and write. It's going to be like a crucial skill set.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think when you look at the changes that are happening in education, and the big push for coding literacy, it's a way of thinking. I think one of the kind of thinkings at the moment is if we teach everyone to code, then everybody can code and go into a job as a coder. But I think it'll become more like maths and English and science, where you learn those subjects from a young age, but you don't go and necessarily do them, but in your day job and in your career, but they arm you with a set of tools and a way of thinking about problems, and give you kind of a good foundation of how the world works. And yeah, you're right. I think software and coding is such a big part of our lives already in a way that it wasn't even 10 or 15 years ago. In 100 years, it is going to be as integrated into our society as languages and maths and science as a fundamental part. At that point there won't be anybody alive who was pre-internet, and that means that it's just going to be the way of the world. Everything is connected all the time, and I think having a really good strong understanding from a young age will be kind of vital. I think we're a transitionary period at the moment of people that remember what the times were like before, and so we're sort of working it out as we go. But I think we need to kind of set the foundation for people in the future.
I was going to say, me and Jules were the kind of generation that grew up with the PS1, PS2, and
yeah,
that was the internet of things.
That was
right?
it, right?
Yeah.
I still remember that dial-up sound of
Yes.
connected to the internet. I won't try and do the impressive.
Yeah, when I started playing a game when I was about 10 years old, my parents still had dial-up internet, and I think after 2 months they changed the internet supply very quickly.
yeah. If nothing else, just to stop you complaining, right?
yeah. So, what made you get into this whole new world of coding and development?
Yeah, so I'd actually had 3 attempts at learning to code. It was always something that interested me from a young age. I remember my dad explaining a couple of aspects of what's called binary, which is representing numbers in ones and zeros, which is how computers think. I remember him explaining that to me when I was like 6 or something. At the time, I had no idea why he was doing that, but that's what dads do, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I got to about 11 or 12, I was like, I want to code computer games. And I think an awful lot of people who come into coding particularly around that time, that's their first thing, right? Because we play games, we're kids, it's fun. I want to learn how to code computer games. So I had a little crack there, got a book, didn't get very far. I think I broke the computer and Dad had to fix it, which was great. And it wasn't making games. Like I wasn't, the barrier to entry was pretty high back then. And so it was like, oh, I'm just doing boring things. So I kind of lost interest. Then on my degree, they tried to teach us, I did an electronics degree, they tried to teach us in the first and second year, and I just had no interest in the things that they were teaching us how to program. It just didn't, I couldn't get the relevance of it. I was like, we're doing electronics, why are we doing all of this? And then the third time that actually stuck was on my PhD, where you're kind of set out into a research lab on your own to just make stuff and find new things. And it became apparent to me pretty quickly, I really need to learn how to code. And so because I then had a reason to do it, that's what I then stuck with it. And just that first moment of like solving a problem with code myself, I'll never forget that rush of like, I just did this and I solved the problem using code, and now I never have to solve that problem again. And that's what got me into it. I had the bug at that point. And this was kind of 2010, 2009, 2010. And yeah, so that's what kind of made me think, yeah, this is what I want to do moving forwards.
So obviously you were there forced with a problem you had to solve, but what sort of coding language did you use? How did you find the steps to get yourself going and start learning about this?
Yeah, so back when I first learned, the online resources were nowhere near as good as they are now. I already knew that books weren't going to cut it for me. I wasn't a sit down and go through a book person for learning to code. I wanted something more interactive, and I found, I don't know how, but I'm so glad I did. I found a course put out on the internet by Harvard University for free. I think it was on iTunes U back when that was a thing. I don't know if that is still a thing now. Called CS50, Computer Science 50, and it's their introduction to computer science. And it is, I think it's the course that Mark Zuckerberg took.
Oh, wow.
I think he could code before he came into that. And it's had a number of kind of very well-known tech people go through that course. And it's kind of legendary on Harvard's campus of being a really great course to take. And all the lectures were up for free. All the problem sets were up for free. And the lecturer was just amazing. A guy called David Malin. And I would imagine there are many people around the world who can credit the start of their careers to that man, because he just made programming so relatable. And in the course of all these videos, he walked you through the fundamentals, how to construct programs, your first couple of languages. I think by the time I'd gone through that course, I'd used 3 programming languages: C, PHP, HTML, CSS for websites, a fun little drag and drop one called Scratch, which is great for kids. So if anyone listening has kids that they want to sort of get into programming, take a look at Scratch. It's a really, really fun, colorful visual programming language made by MIT. And yeah, that course gave me a really good grounding. It was very challenging. It was hard, really hard. But it just gave me a really solid grounding on the fundamentals, and a great way to step off into other areas. So yeah, like I can 100% credit the start of my career to an online lecturer in the US who has never met me or heard of me, but a big impact on mine and I think many other people's lives. So yeah.
So working in the industry, have you now seen people come into the industry that have taken specific degrees within coding? You yourself did a tech degree, but maybe there's degrees out there now that are really, really just coding focused.
Yeah, and so computer science is the main degree, and there are derivatives of that. There's sort of computer engineering, software engineering, web development, but CS is kind of the main degree that people would take to come into the industry. I should say though that you absolutely do not need a degree to work in this industry, but CS, that seems to be the main one that people have, something with sort of computer in the title is a really good entry point. Computer science is interesting. The word science kind of gives it away. It is not a kind of direct mapping to exactly what you do in your day job. It is more kind of fundamentals, learning about design patterns and algorithms and sort of optimizations and that kind of thing. It's a bit more academic. And when you kind of then come into the industry with a CS degree, you know, the first task you'll get is make this button blue, make that button red. And so it can be a bit of a kind of come down to earth for people off the back of what is quite a complicated degree. But it is a really good way into the industry that kind of sets you up for long-term success. However, the demand for programming and coders is just absolutely through the roof right now. It's just ridiculous. And it seems to have kind of really gone up in the last 6 months to a year. And so there are, other than the ability to code, self-taught or otherwise, there are no real prerequisites. But if you did want to go and do a degree, then computer science, technology, web development, software engineering, those are the titles you want to be looking for.
So let's, someone like me who is very, very new to this whole kind of world and understanding it, where do software developers work? What kind of industries are you in and what kind of companies do you work for? It might seem like a silly question, but.
No, I think it's a really good question because I think very often we think about a job and a career and then you think, right, well, that means I'm going to always be working in a car factory. For example, my wife is an automotive engineer, so she'll always be attached to a car plant. And likewise, something like a lawyer, they're always going to be generally working at solicitors, places like that. However, like, say, an accountant, or actually to a certain extent, a lawyer, solicitor, you can work anywhere in software engineering because every company has software requirements of some kind. So you could be working for an e-commerce retailer, a retailer. Sainsbury's have a large tech department and they're a supermarket. You could be working for a tech company, say a Facebook or an Uber or Spotify or someone like that. You could be working for an accountancy practice, writing internal systems. I can't imagine there are many companies around the world larger than a few hundred employees that don't have some kind of in-house developer or working very closely with agencies who provide them with software services, because as we alluded to at the start of the chat, software is taking over the world and it is finding its way into every single industry. So if you want to work for a retailer, absolutely you can do that. My first professional software job was working for a UK high street retailer on their warehouse systems. If you want to work for an accountancy practice, you can almost certainly do that. There is nowhere that you can't work as a software developer, which is great because it means you're employable anywhere. It's also a nightmare in working out actually where do you want to focus and where do you want to go, because everyone can employ you.
So do you still get bunched into the IT department for want of a better title, or is this software development world becoming a body in its own right within companies?
Yeah, I think it depends how the company is set up. So yes, if you're not working for a tech company per se, if you're working for a retailer or what have you, you will be in IT, and you'll be working alongside the kind of traditional what we think of as IT, so kind of networking people and that kind of stuff. So yeah, you'll be part of the IT department. But if you're working for a company where tech is more the product, then you won't feel like you're in IT. You will just be in one of the teams doing work, in much the same way that if you worked at a car plant, for example, you don't feel like you're a mechanic. You are working as part of building cars and the R&D and that kind of thing. So I think it depends what the company does as to sort of what department you are in or feel like you're in. But fundamentally, the job doesn't really change. You are still writing code to solve problems for the business. It might just be internal problems for a retailer, or it might be as part of the product if it were a Spotify or something like that.
How much of this role is a team game? I've never worked in the industry, but I've always wondered how teams work together to create something.
Yeah, so this is probably the hardest part of software. So so I should say that my career has been peculiar. I ran my own business for 8 years that wasn't making software, but I wrote a lot of software for that business to kind of keep the wheels moving. And during that time, I was a lone wolf. I didn't even know another software engineer. I was asking questions online. I was taking tutorials. I was researching and trying to solve all of the problems myself. And everything was just a solo endeavor. If I got stuck, there was no one I could turn to. I just had to keep going on through, change tack, change approach. Never did I have to give up on a project, but I came pretty close a couple of times because you don't have a team. So you can work that way. And there's many software engineers who do that and have, great successful businesses making, apps and full stack websites and really quite complicated bits of software made by one person. You can work as part of a team, and that's when it becomes easier in one sense, because you're significantly less likely to get stuck because you've got other people to bounce ideas off, and they can help you and you can help them and what have you, the kind of classic team stuff. But organizing the software development approach is hugely complicated. And I think a lot of that boils down to that you can't see software. It's in hard drives, it's in computers, it's in servers in the web. And I can't remember who I've nicked this line off, but I read a couple of years ago that software is the largest thing we still make by hand. Like everything else, we've kind of found ways to automate the building of.
Yeah.
But if there's a line of code in Apple's infrastructure, it's been written by hand by a human at a keyboard. Like there isn't, I know we talk about kind of AI writing code and what have you, but that is, it's a tiny portion of the code that gets written. And so, if you were to look at, if we could visualize what software is, a website run by one person is maybe, a couple of houses or something. An e-commerce retailer like I used to work for, that's probably, a small village. Something like Facebook and Apple, they're maybe even bordering on countries worth of infrastructure. And it requires, in some cases, thousands of people to build that. And so the way that is addressed is to break everything down as small as possible. Like that's one of the core parts of computer science and software engineering, is to keep breaking the problem down into the smallest possible statement that you can, until you get down to what is really just a few fundamental building blocks of conditional if else's and plus minus and divide and what have you. And so they do the same with teams. And so we break everything down into small manageable chunks of work that build up to an overall feature or product. And each developer will take one of those, what we call user stories. So it might be written as a user, I want to press the play button and hear music playing. And you will have thousands of stories written like that, that come together to make a piece of software, and each of those would get picked up by a developer, and they would work away on that, and then they would push it back into the code base along with everybody else's changes, and you hope that you don't kind of conflict with other people's work. And there's a whole industry of tools around just allowing teams to build software, from kind of version control, where you can look back through history and see who made what changes to the code base in what place, to project management software specifically designed around managing software. And there's even a whole industry called Agile, that is an approach to making software that it is all about kind of sort of fast iterations, do the smallest amount of work to meet the requirements, get feedback and change and move on. So yeah, just managing the software development lifecycle is hugely complicated and is an industry in unto itself. And so if people are thinking, oh, I really love tech and really want to get into it, but I just don't fancy the coding side of things. The project management and product development side of tech is just as important, just as interesting, and an industry that doesn't have the sort of the scary, terrifying code aspect to look at and deal with every day.
Interesting. That we actually had a project manager on a while ago, and he was sort of telling us all about that world, and it does seem I can't believe how big the world of software development and coding and managing it is. And I don't think, I might be speaking for other people, but I don't think 95% of people understand that world and just how big it is.
Yeah, 100%. Like I've sort of tried to explain what I do at a slightly more technical level to people before, and you can see very quickly that if they don't have an awareness of sort of how computers work and what code is, it just doesn't it doesn't compute, and it's not because people can't understand it. It's just because it is very abstract. We've built systems and approaches to building software that is just abstractions upon electronics, and that's pretty complicated as well. And I'm sort of fortunate in a way because of my background with my degree that I understand what's going on inside the computer to a certain level as well. Like I have an awareness there, and that's not required at all. But for me, as a fairly practical engineering type bod, I'm as happy with a hammer in my hands as I am a keyboard. That really kind of helps me. And so when I've tried to explain it before to people, I'm like, well, how do I explain this without like just completely bombarding you with fundamental technical information that's not going to help? And basically, coding is writing a really, really specific set of instructions that's way more specific than you could ever imagine having to write to tell a human. There's a great video online of a dad who he says to his kids, tell me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they're like, well, do this, do that. And it goes wrong all the time because he follows their instructions perfectly to the letter, and something goes catastrophically wrong, and you can see the children like, oh no, of course that happened. I just forgot that you would do that. It was like I think one of the best ones was the daughter said, put the knife in the peanut butter jar, and so he put it in handle first. And she's like, oh no. And that's what computers are like. You're like, oh, just do that.
It's funny you mentioned that. I'm working as a production engineer, and I've got my boss did an exercise with some of the lads downstairs of, can you write me instructions to make a tea? And he did that literally a couple of weeks ago, and it was quite a hilarious outcome, actually.
Yeah, like even just like pour water. Well, the assumption is you'll pour it in the mug, but if you haven't said that, just pour water on the countertop. So, and that is basically a really good analogy for what a software engineer does. We write incredibly specific instructions to tell a machine what to do that has no idea of the context and what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how to do it differently. So if you miss something, it will go wrong. And so, when you log into Facebook or you open up Netflix and something weird happens, that's because we, a full stack developer, forgot to cover off that specific case. And so then there's the whole world of testing software as well, which is again hugely important to what I do, because I cover so much ground, particularly as a full stack developer. I can start my day off writing a piece of UI with a button or what have you, and then by the end of the day, I'm creating new bits of infrastructure to host a database, and stuff gets missed, and so that's where kind of testing comes in. So you don't pour hot water over your foot.
So I could be completely wrong here, but this is just my brain interpreting what you said. If somebody could crack the case of building something with context that could understand your instructions, then that would make what coding does a lot easier. Is that AI? Is that what?
Potentially. It's not something I've thought very much on, to be honest. If we could give computers a level of context, that would be great. However, I think at that point you're getting towards consciousness, and these are interesting. This is many of the topics that you can look into on a computer science degree, and is an area of study and active research of what is consciousness and what is it to have a computer. And really, when we're talking about what I'm doing, full stack development, it's multiple computers and multiple machines interacting together and serving requests. How do we impart consciousness into something is a really big question. I mean, is it possible that our brains are just fantastically fast computers, maybe biological computers? How much more powerful are our brains than our current crop of computers? Is significantly. We just process information in a different way. So I think that's where you start to get into the realms of kind of quantum computing and all of the kind of big stuff going on there that, quite frankly, I'm not that qualified to sort of have an opinion on, but I think we could all pontificate a little bit. So yeah, I think maybe that's a really interesting question. Maybe ask a computer science and AI researcher. I'm sure they've got some really fascinating thoughts around that.
Yeah, it just seems that, is that the kind of where the software development world is heading towards? Quantum computing is going to start becoming a thing, and this whole argument around consciousness it must be such an interesting field to work in, because you're kind of at the forefront of, I feel like, software development maybe it's just at the beginning of what we're going to be able to do with it.
Yeah, I think so. It's one thing that is very interesting in the industry is it moves very fast, and there is an expression of standing on the shoulders of giants. And so, a good analogy for me is that everything I write goes into Google's infrastructure, and we are hosted by Google, and Google solves a lot of problems for us. And they solve problems that 10 years ago I would have had to have solved before I could even solve the problem my customers need, and 20 years ago would have been hugely difficult. And that's why the cost of software development has massively plummeted compared to where it was 20, 30 years ago, because we keep bringing in new tools and new ways of solving problems and automating part of the process, and essentially making areas of your job redundant every few years. There's sort of trends and waves that come through the industry to solve problems for software developers so that we can solve bigger problems for users. And we'll keep seeing those waves come in, year and year and decade after decade, that eventually we'll probably get to the point, like you say, of some kind of, I don't know if it'd be consciousness or singularity or what, but over many, many iterations of that, we will find something, I'm sure, that has some level of, I don't know if it's consciousness or what, but yeah, and that's part of what software engineering is. It's not just solving problems for customers; it is solving our own problems and then feeding that into the system and having other engineers pick up those methodologies and use that in their systems, and then they'll find something or develop something new. And we're all building on top of what we're all building all the time. It's one of the real upsides and downsides is stuff never changes, stuff never stays the same, and it's always developing. But at the same time, it's hard to keep up sometimes, because you've got so many people working not just on their customers' problems, but on their own software engineering problems.
And for you, what would be some personality traits that you think a software engineer helps them thrive in this industry?
Yeah, so I think patience and perseverance. What I'm working on, if I'm writing code around an area, it means that I'm making something new or I'm fixing something. So therefore, most of the time, what I'm doing is working with something that's broken and trying to fix the next bit of it. And as soon as you fix it, you're like, great, excellent. You get your little rush of, I fixed that, and then you move on to the next new or broken thing. And when you get bogged down on something for a long time, that can be really, really tough when you've tried 3 or 4 different approaches. And it seems like it doesn't matter what I do, nothing changes it, nothing improves it. And then you'll keep going, and you'll maybe chat to a team member, and you'll both have a look at it, and then you'll have a little epiphany. You're like, okay, and that could be 2 hours, or it could be 2 weeks or 2 months. It can be a very long time to get through. And if you aren't able to persevere and be patient and understand that you're just going through the process, you're going to have a disappointing time. And then also as well, weirdly, communication skills are really important in software engineering. Unless you are that lone solo developer out on their own, it is a team effort. It's a team game. And I have dozens of calls a day with other programmers and other team members clarifying, okay, what is it you actually want this to do? I know you've in the ticket you've written XYZ, but have you considered ABC? What do you want to happen there? And you're talking to non-technical people quite a lot of the time, and so you need to be able to explain to them any issues and limitations you have with the system and how you are writing that code and what they can and can't have, without just saying jargon to them, and then taking what they're saying back. Maybe it's a user or a product owner. You're taking what they're saying back to you and then thinking about how you can bring that into the system and how you can express those ideas. One of the things I like to say to people is that software is an expression of an idea. You had an idea to allow someone to click a button and have a car arrive and drive you off somewhere. And you can think of that as a product, but really it's an idea. And that's what software engineers and full stack developers are doing. They're taking those ideas, implementing them in code, showing them back to the person that had the idea and saying, is this what you had in mind? And if you're not very good at communicating, that's also going to be a pretty tough loop and process to go through.
And for you, what would be the biggest positive you've had so far within the industry?
Oh, interesting. I think when I wrote my first iPhone app,
cool.
was which doesn't technically fall under full stack developer, but it falls under software engineer. I was running my business and managing a just-in-time manufacturing facility, and we never quite had enough money to really stock up on parts, and I was finding myself running spreadsheets and stock calculations and all sorts for 2.5 days a week and not actually, improving the product or writing other software for the business around our e-commerce store and what have you. And so I was like, right, I am going to solve this problem with software, because I knew what I needed. I needed something that could run those calculations for me and give me stock warnings and say, hey, you need to order this, and this was your production rate yesterday and what have you. And so, it was my first big piece of software. Took me 8 months to write it, I think. And I made a full stock management application for small factories. And the first time I input the data into that while we were actually in a production phase, and I got a little stock warning to say, you're going to run out of this part within the lead time plus a week. So you need to order that this week, or that's going to be an issue for you in 10 weeks time. And I was like, this is amazing. I've really solved. And I went from 2.5 days a week of managing supply chain and all of that kind of stuff to less than a morning a week, because the app took over a lot of that quote unquote thinking for me. So I think from my own perspective, that was really fantastic. And then actually in the industry proper was the first feature that I wrote for a user. It was during my induction. We were sat in a warehouse, and this lady was showing me how the system works, and it was a piece of in-house software. And she just showed, as a side note, she was like, I don't know why this list is ordered this way around. It's really annoying. I have to scroll all the way to the bottom to be able to see the most recent thing. And I was like, okay, that is really annoying. And it was on like day 2. And I was like, I'm not going to say anything, but I'm pretty sure I could fix that in about 5 minutes. And so I went back into the office and I said to one of the guys, I was like, so she said this. And he's like, oh yeah, that does bug me. I was like, I can fix it. He's like, yeah, go ahead, fix it. And I think within like a day or so, I got it fixed. Got it reviewed by another software developer. They'd okayed it, got it into production, and I rang her up and I said, hey, just go and have a look at that list. And she was like, "Oh, it's the right way around." I was like, "Yes, it is." There you go. And that was really nice because it was literally not very much effort for me, but it was a list that she interacted with 100 times a day, and she was having to do all of this unnecessary scrolling because she never cared about the top of the list. She only cared about the last entry in the list, and it was hundreds of records down the bottom of the screen that she couldn't see. So that was really fantastic to kind of solve that problem for somebody that she'd had for years, and know that I had an impact on her sort of daily work life.
And on the flip side of that, what would be some less favorable aspects of this industry?
Yeah, so I've kind of alluded to it already. The pace is fast. New technologies come out all the time, and you need to spend quite a lot of time learning and developing your skills, keeping yourself up to date. So a typical week for me would be about 40 hours of day job work. That isn't 40 hours of coding. There's probably about just over half, maybe 30 hours, and the rest will be meetings and what have you. And then I spend probably another 5 hours to 10 hours a week learning in some capacity. So that might be actually actively coding and working on side projects with a new technology, might be taking an online course, listening to podcasts for software development. Even my Instagram is follow a lot of software engineers and talking to other developers. It is particularly the full stack web world, you need to keep up because a change can come through. And if you haven't kept up to date, you very quickly find yourself not just one iteration behind, but 4 or 5 iterations behind. And so, yeah, if you're not kind of happy learning in your own time and putting that effort in, and it's all self-directed, it's not like I have friends who are doctors and, they know what exams they need to take. They know what study they need to take for where they want to go. But I could invest 5 weeks learning a new technology that then disappears 6 months later. And okay, I wasted that time. What's the next technology that I think I should learn? And so it's all self-directed, and you never know if you're kind of wasting that effort or not. So that is, and that does. Burnout is a real thing in the industry. It is a problem. Not everyone suffers with it. That's part of the benefit of working in a team is you'll start to see the signs of somebody kind of burning out. But people retire. There's a joke in software engineering web world. So one of the database technologies we use is called SQL or SQL, and it never changes. It changes a bit, but it's massive. It's been around for years. It's not going anywhere. And one of the jokes is like when you've had enough, you just retire into SQL and you just do database work for the rest of your life because you're kind of done keeping up, as it were. So that is a definite downside, and not something that I think people are aware of until they're into the industry by that point, and then it's like, oh no, this is what I also have to do to keep up.
And usually at this point we go away and we talk about average salaries, so we go and look for some data and just see if you would agree with the figures. So apparently the average salary for a full stack developer in the UK is around £50,000. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on, actually. It's gone kind of crazy in the last 6 months. So I would expect that number to jump up over the next 2 years as data kind of comes in. I would say probably within a couple of years that'll be more like 65, 70,000. Just because the pandemic forced a lot of people to have an online strategy where they didn't before, or to significantly invest in their online strategy. So be it primarily e-commerce, and so you're seeing a lot of companies doubling, tripling, quadrupling their engineering teams. And so that is pushing salaries up significantly, bringing them more in line with the US, which has always had much higher full stack salaries.
So do you think that in, say, 10, maybe 20 years' time, all companies will have maybe a software developer within them, like they would have a marketing manager per se?
Yes, but I think if they're a company of any size, it'll be more than just 1 or 2 people. It'll be a team, or a team that's part of an agency that they're paying for, which is also very common. this industry is only growing, and the requirement for full stack specifically is growing because we're generalists. We can cover a full end-to-end feature front to back in a way that if you had more specialized engineers, they wouldn't. We wouldn't do as amazing as a job at each of the sections. Our UI doesn't generally look quite as good as a specialist front-end UI developer, and our back-end code might not be quite as optimized as a specialist back-end engineer. However, we can build the whole thing front to back. And so, that specifically full stack requirements is growing.
So when we talk about software development, you mentioned we have front end, we have back end, and there's another one as well you mentioned.
Yeah, so there's like sort of the database and infrastructure layers. Yeah.
So is that, if you're a tech company, are those three the mainstays of everything the company does? All three of those, but they just break them down into specialisms, or is there another part to the world we don't know about?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, I'm lumping the database and the infrastructure layer together, but again, you could actually divide that further and say, well, infrastructure is different from database. So you can kind of look at it as 4 levels. There's traditional IT, so go back kind of 10, 20 years. There was quite a division between development and operations. So, you would your developers will work for a number of months. They'd have it all working on their local systems, and then they would throw it over the fence to operations, and operations would then have to, usually with significantly less time, have to work out how to actually get the application up and running and working and spin it up. And it was often sort of, horrible weeks of work of getting it to work. And so there's a blending now of the two called Devops, which is a whole career in its own right as well, of making that sort of continuous process much less fraught. And so that means that as a developer, I now have to have much more understanding of the deep, dark infrastructure, whereas 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have had any knowledge of it at all. So yeah, there's 4 layers. And if you're at a tech company, your product relies solely on those 4 layers. All of the work you're doing at those 4 layers is your product. Whereas if you're working for something like a retailer, those 4 layers are very important, but they're in service to the product that's being sold. So it's a slightly different mindset, but still fundamentally the same work.
And what would be something that's just not in the job description you never expected to be dealing with working in this industry?
How difficult the team process is. It is surprisingly hard to keep a team of software developers and product people and testers all kind of moving along together at a good pace that's predictable and understandable, and actually delivers what a business or customer needs. And this is where the agile industry has come in to try and address that. And I never realized how tricky it was for that process to work. And when it goes wrong, how badly it can go wrong, not just from a product point of view, but also from the impact it has on the team members. It's definitely really important and just not something that you think about, because you think, oh, just coding a computer and telling it what to do. It's like, no, you're working as part of a team, and it's really hard to manage all of that.
With there being a short supply of people for the jobs and the salaries increasing year on year, do you find a lot of movement within the industry of people being poached for different companies and things like that?
Yeah, I think it is a problem, because once you're at a company, and this is the same for any industry, your pay rises generally aren't going to be much more than 5-10% a year, and even less if you're less fortunate. And so if you can jump your salary 20-30% after a year by making a move to another company, particularly in the kind of junior through mid-level, before you get up to kind of senior and lead developer, people make those jumps and make those moves. And that's why you hear about Google having beanbags and slides and unlimited paid time off, which is what Netflix has, and just trying to make it a really nice, pleasant work environment, because it is a hard job, but it's not, it's not physically hard. It's just mentally draining. And if it's an unpleasant work environment for whatever reason, or you don't feel like you get enough holiday and that kind of thing, that's a way that companies can differentiate. But yeah, I mean, when I say the demand is high, I probably get 2 or 3 inbound recruiter emails a day. Yeah, a day. Wow. So I can look at my LinkedIn. That's just my LinkedIn. Will have 2 or 3 a day. My email will probably have another 1 or 2, and I probably get 2 or 3 phone calls a week. So yeah, and that's not just me. That's every software developer I know, and that's happening to other people on your team as well. And so like you're like, oh, who's got what call, and like, are we all still going to be here in 6 months and what have you? So yeah, when I say the demand is high, it is astronomically high right now.
What piques your interest then when some of these recruiters are coming to you? Because loads of industries get bombarded by recruiters, but what's something that makes you go, oh, actually I'm quite interested in this?
Yeah, so for me personally, I'm very user and product driven. I really want to solve a problem for a user and make a user's life better. And so if I can see the work I'm doing has an impact directly to somebody, that's very rewarding for me. I said that story earlier of reversing a list, but I knew it had a big impact on her day. But some people they don't like that. They don't like the kind of perhaps the pressure that brings. And so that's fine as well. There's plenty of roles the user will never see what you're doing, and it's back end work, and it's more about sort of keeping systems up and running and optimizing. And there's also a lot of maintenance work as well. You don't. I said earlier, you kind of have to keep up. You don't, because there are older systems that aren't going anywhere. There are languages that we would now consider dead in programming that still run large parts of most countries' infrastructure, from power and electrical distribution to the banking sector. Languages like Fortran and COBOL, people haven't actively written new things in those for 20 years, but there's a big industry in just maintaining old systems. So if you really like that kind of thing, that's also somewhere that you can go. And again, that's all often made pretty clear in the job specs. So you get pretty good at going through job specs when you see as many as you do in software, and picking up, is this a new development role? Is it a maintenance role? Is it an optimization role? And there's lots of depending on how your brain ticks, there's lots of different options for what piques your interest and what will make you actually go back to a recruiter. But unfortunately, that doesn't really help a recruiter pique the interest of a software engineer, because it's more about the role than it is about the way it's presented, unfortunately for recruiters.
So how does somebody begin to progress once they're in the industry?
Yeah, so a typical career path would start as a junior developer. And then maybe after a year or 2, you'd be promoted to software engineer or mid-level developer. That's often broken up into sort of software engineer 1 and 2, and then you have senior and then lead and principal above that. And as you go through that, as a junior, there's very little expectations on your ability. You would be working a lot with another developer, seeing how they work. You might get given small tasks to go and take away on your own, and come back and see how you did. And it's at that point, it's very much about taking the knowledge that you have and seeing how it sort of fits into a production system. As you move through, it's all about writing code that is easy to maintain, well tested, and ideally bug free, but that is impossible in my view. There will always be bugs that get through somehow. And then working better with others. So like I said, it's collaborative. Nobody wants to work with a rock star coder who is a pain in the backside to deal with. It's just unpleasant. That is a sort of an issue. And so yeah, it's about sort of solving problems, developing your skills, being a good communicator, and really engaging with the team is the recipe for success in software engineering. And just being proactive and developing yourself and delivering value to the business is the way forwards on that front. And just time served, really. I mean, it's sort of 2 years junior, 3 years mid-level, 4 years maybe, then you're sort of senior, and then you get to start mentoring more, maybe take on some management responsibilities, but that's not required. So yeah, it's a lot of it is soft skills as much as it is sort of hardcore technical skills.
And would you still go into this industry knowing everything you know now?
Absolutely. I love writing software. I love coding. I love solving problems for people. So yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, I would still go into this industry, even knowing what I do now.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Simon. It's genuinely been so interesting, and I could talk to you for hours. Yeah, really appreciate your time. Yeah,
thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's been really good fun to talk about what I do every day. I really enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so best place to find me is my Instagram, which is at allthecode, ALLTHECODE, and I have pretty much daily posts and stories on writing software, becoming a better software developer, and that kind of thing. So yeah, go check me out on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Cheers, guys. Thanks very much. It's great fun.